Good afternoon. I should say good morning first, then good afternoon, good evening, good night, whichever part of the world and whatever time zone you are joining us from, welcome. Welcome to the Black Consciousness Festival's weekend of conversations about reparations, claiming what is rightfully ours. 185,435 days late and trillions short. The Black Consciousness Festival is a global online platform for the commemoration, celebration, and sharing of vital histories and stories that boost the awareness and impact of the pride, power, and practice of people of African descent. Our inaugural year was the magical and historical 2020, where we curated a month of conversations and activities around topics of Black consciousness. Earlier in 2021, we had our youth festival, and now our weekend of conversations on reparations. The Black Consciousness Festival is continuing the building of awareness around how each of us can take the necessary steps for restitution, which is healing, and reparation, the repair. You can find more on the festival at our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. My name is Ivel Janelle Grant Williams, and as part of the team, I am humbled to introduce today's conversation. Today, we present a conversation entitled The Path to Progress, Reconciliation, and Closure. This conversation will be led by Sean Samad, one of the founders of the festival. He is a candidate for a PhD in cultural studies, a Brazilianist, and lectures courses on Brazilian culture. He is a Trinbagonian who speaks Portuguese, Spanish, some French, Italian. His maternal line is of the Yoruba and Fulani ethnic groups, and he is committed to the work that needs to be done in the diaspora towards restitution and repair. We thank you for joining or tuning in on our Zoom webinar or live Facebook stream. Feel free to post anything you hear that touches you, and make sure to tag us on Facebook and Instagram. Now, turning it over to Sean, who will share space with our esteemed guest panelist. Enjoy.
Thank you so much, Ivel. And welcome to everyone who's joining us, as Ivel said, on either our Zoom webinar or on our Facebook live stream. So this afternoon, we have lots of conceptual and intellectual goodies for you all. We're joined by two really interesting gentlemen. First, Mr. Shabaka Kambon, an accomplished Caribbean communications consultant and activist. He's the founder and director of the Freedom Project, Cross Rhodes Freedom Project, whose stated aim is a more just society through the revitalization of the Caribbean Civilization Project, which started at independence. The project's pilot initiative started in 2017 and seeks to address the historically forged ethos, which gives space and preeminence to some of the vilest colonial figures without ever interrogating the true atrocities of their actions and repercussions. We're also joined by Dr. John Hunte. He's an arts practitioner, activist as well, teacher, and received a PhD in cultural studies from University of the West Indies, Cave Hill, Barbados campus. He is currently the executive director of Barbados Dance Project, Inc., a not-for-profit organization dedicated to collaboration, educating, and engaging through dance. He currently serves as artistic director for Barbados Dance Theatre, Inc., and is an ordained minister in the Caribbean Regional Spiritual Baptist Community, and currently serves as the chair of the Council of Spiritual Baptist Churches of Barbados. So welcome, gentlemen. After such an esteemed introduction, I want to jump right into today's conversation by asking you to open this conversation in whatever way you think is best. So either Dr. Hunte or Shabaka, whichever, if you guys would like to open the conversation.
I want to defer to the man with the better bed.
Dr. Hunter on the spot.
I think that Sean, I don't know, but what I think we will try to discuss today is basically the way that we are accomplices in the colonial violence. We continue in the present day to be accomplices in colonial violence, and I think the way that colonial violence undermines our efforts to get reparations. I think that's the connection between what we're going to be talking about today and the issue of reparations. Okay. So we're going to be looking internally at ourselves today rather than looking at the people who, well, we still have to look at them critically. But today we're going to be really we're going to be asking questions of ourselves. Do we have the capacity to understand our past, the courage to confront that past, and the will and moral character to choose a better future? I think that's the question that I'm going to try to pose to us today in the discussion. Brother Hunt, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I think in that regard, if we're gonna have that kind of conversation, we need to be mindful about all the the other places, spaces, peoples that need to be here or need to be remembered or be acknowledged as we have this conversation. So I'm mindful that we're coming from different spaces. So however we think about who God is, who our divine entities are, we like to bring them into the space. We like to bring into the space all the energies, all the forces of nature, all the ways our systems we think about ourselves as spiritual people also. We can bring into the space. We want to think about ourselves. The various peoples who were here, we think about in the Caribbean space, for instance, the Taino, the Kalinago, the Sydney, and the people who passed through the space. We want to give honor and also think of them. We want to also think about all the various ancestors who came across the waters, who are now in the space as well. Those of them who wish to come forward and be acknowledged, and maybe those of them who wish to step back. I want to respect that, but I will also would like to give honor and space for them to be here. And also for all of our ancestors, the ancestors of myself and my families, and ancestors of everybody here, that we can all join together in this conversation, and we can all inform and also even make a contribution to this conversation to make it as balanced as what my brother is offering with his provocation. So I want to give thanks for that, and I want to give thanks for all of those who are here, and to have them enter into the space that we can all commune and contribute.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that. Shabaka, you started off with fire, brother. Accomplices in colonial violence. And then the three words that you follow with that: understanding, courage, and will. Give us a little bit more. Explain that a little bit more for us. When you say that we need to understand the past, that we have to have the courage to face what has been done in the past and the will to move forward. How does that look for you?
Yeah, let me just thank Brother Hunt there for remembering the ancestors in today's conversation, for really bringing the African tradition to the fore here today. As I said, the man has a better bed, a bigger bed. I'm sure he's heavy. So, thank you, my brother. But I think that, Sean, what we need, what we have to do is what the rest of the world is doing right now. Right? We're living through an extraordinary historical moment in which people all over the world, people who you would not have expected are attempting to reckon with their past in the most extraordinary ways. And we in the Caribbean, to a large extent, are being left out of this conversation. And tragically, and what makes that even more tragic is that we are at the beginning of the conversation that everybody else is having. The process of creating the idea of black and white, first class and second class citizen, north and south, west and the rest, all those concepts by which we're struggling to grapple with today, this uneven international economy, and the way it's replicated within our society, everything that we're grappling with starts, the modern period of globalization starts in the Caribbean.
That's right.
500 years ago. with the introduction of Christopher Columbus. And everybody else outside of the Caribbean is beginning to grapple with these questions. They're showing that they have the capacity to understand their past and the courage to confront it. But we are being systematically blocked here in the Caribbean by the powers that be at various levels from having the kind of conversations we need to have about our past so that they could protect the narratives that we were bequeathed by colonialism, which attempt to try to hide the colonial crimes from us. And let me just bring this point home to people who wouldn't grasp what I'm saying. You know, there is no accident, right? Why you and I don't know or will never come into contact with a whip from the period of enslavement. We'll never come into contact with a shackle from the period of enslavement. We don't know that the very places that we're moving around in our estates, the University of the West Indies, was a former plantation. And in the context of Trinidad, the one, what I would call a forced slavery camp, we use the word plantation as a kind of euphemism, really one of the concentration camp for forced labor. The only one that was set up and constituted in such a way that we could learn from it was the one in Lopino. And there, we set up until the Cross Rhodes Freedom Project was victorious in our project this year, we celebrated the slave master and his wife as illustrious and ridiculed the people they worked until death as loyal slaves. So I think, I don't think I could find a metaphor for this conversation stronger than that to really get the point across that we were never supposed to come into contact with the colonial crimes, either from a visible, tangible, or God forbid, educational way, the way the society was constructed. And today, we are accomplices in that colonial effort.
Right. That's an incredible statement. When you say that we are accomplices, it implicates us, it implicates everything that we do and do not do here in the region. Dr. Hunt, tell me about, Shabaka mentioned protecting the narratives. From your experience and from what you've seen playing out in your own country and throughout the region, tell us how you see that manifesting, you know, the power structures protecting the narrative.
Well, I'm listening to my colleague and I'm hearing the word accomplice and I'm asking myself, are we willing accomplices? If I assume that we are we willing accomplices or are we accomplices by default? Are we accomplices by the conditioning that we receive, you know, from birth? Is this a systematic erasure of any information or any connection to our past, which seems to be the case? And that now that we are beginning to wake up, as he would have indicated, how do we begin to address this? And so for a lot of reasons and a lot of things that he's saying, I'm agreeing with, and I'm thinking, well, he continued even in this moment of Renaissance or this moment of awakening to use a Western lens, a Western perspective to look at our lives. If we continue to use that lens, the lens is set up to diminish, marginalize, and put to the side all of the history that is not pertinent to the colonial, to uphold the colonial narrative or to uphold the narrative of the people who conquered, right? So I think maybe in order to get the accomplices, as he says, to notice what has been happening or to notice how they've been co-opted to participate, we need to trouble the lens. We need to change the focus and really bring to fore other ways of seeing, other ways of being, other ways of knowing, and to bring those other narratives to the fore. And sometimes, I think as he was implying, even a historicizing of the narratives that the colonialists present gives us a window into what other ways of seeing, or what other ways of thinking, or what other stories are there waiting to be unearthed. Certainly, you know, when we think of physical spaces, we are seeing a reinstallation of a space from a space of trauma or of abuse, and then this whole plastifying or placating or beautifying, you know, a way that, you know, if you keep the Western lens, you will not be troubled. But if you really think and see and feel other senses, you're beginning to get a sense that something is not right here. And I think the first thing we need to do is to have that sense of awareness and to sit in that awareness, so that we can actually, you know, look to see or feel what are the other narratives that are showing up here.
Yeah, but I think Brother Hunt is concerned in his response there about the way that I appear to put the blame on us. No. Because you know the question of accomplices, the idea of being accomplices. So before we get to this question of accomplices, let's put the blame where it really needs to lie first.
Okay.
And let me just make this really, really clear. And I want to draw our attention to new information that has just come out. The first thing I want to draw our attention to is what they call Operation Legacy. Sean, are you familiar with Operation Legacy?
No, I'm not, no.
Okay, so at the point of decolonization, right, the British state embarked upon a systematic process of destroying the evidence of its crimes. Now, why am I, again, I want to start, every time I talk about these things I introduce, I want to introduce them against the backdrop of the narratives we tell about our past. So for example, I had a debate with, you know, elder lay historian Michael Anthony, where he praised colonialism for giving us the rule of law, for democracy and all kinds of different things. And he couldn't understand why I had such a critical opinion of colonialism. And of course, at the time I had that debate, I wasn't aware of Operation Legacy. But now we know that the British themselves understood that they were involved in activities that they wouldn't want to come to the light of day. And so during the period of decolonization, they engage in a systematic process of destroying the evidence of their crimes, which they called Operation Legacy. And they buried and burnt files. Right here in Trinidad and Tobago, according to the research now coming out, it seems that Sir Solomon Hochoy would have been given orders by the Colonial Office to bury in 1962 in the ocean, to put in weighted crates, you know, any information that could make the British look bad in Trinidad. Now, if they had nothing to hide, if they were so loving to us, if they were so, you know, if we had so much to be thankful for in terms of where we are today, they would not have engaged in such a process.
Right.
And I want to take you back to another historical event, that is World War II, just to make the point a little stronger. There's something I discovered recently which is quite interesting. It seems that the Colonial Office asked the Americans not to bring any African American troops to the Caribbean during World War II, and specifically to Trinidad and Tobago. Why? Because even the African Americans from the impoverished, segregated Jim Crow South enjoyed a comparatively better living conditions than the local Caribbean populations.
Wow.
And it was felt by the Colonial Office, according to declassified documents now, that just the sight of people of a similar hue, of African people, that were better fed, better clothed, better paid, would give us a real sense of the way that the British authorities were depriving us here in the Caribbean and in Trinidad and Tobago in particular, right? So just trying to give us a sense. So I want to...
The context, yeah.
I want to contextualize. I mean, when I talk about us being complicit, I mean, you know, Frantz Fanon talks about colonialism as violence. And it really is, you know, from the beginning, genocide, slavery, indentureship, and more we are coming to use the term apartheid to describe the period between, to best describe the period between the end of slavery or emancipation and independence. That is a period of apartheid. All forms of colonial violence is what we survived. And when I say we're complicit, it means that we are not doing enough to confront that, as I said, to uproot, to retrace those lines of violence, as Frantz Fanon indicated in Wretched of the Earth, and to choose a better future for our people.
Right. And I find it really interesting when you talk about that project legacy, Operation Legacy, sorry, to burn those documents, because it's the first time I've ever heard that, but I've heard a similar story coming out of the Brazilian context. At emancipation of the enslaved in Brazil, they did something quite similar, where they burnt. There was like a registrar where they kept all the documentation of all the Africans that were trafficked into Brazil, all the slave ships, etc., and records of where they were deployed in terms of plantation. And upon the abolition of slavery in Brazil, they instructed the keepers of the registrar to burn the building to the ground, obviously understanding the value of that documentation and improving some of the wrongs that they had done during the colonial period. So the similarity between the two, it seems to be a kind of colonial playbook almost, for colonial powers. Understanding all that you said, Shabaka, and understanding the context, and you saying that we're not doing enough. Tell me a little bit, Dr. Hunt, about what you see happening in the Barbadian context, what's being done, and if you think that that's enough.
Well, I mean, to me, there's the entitlement. So our version of that story is colonial masters, being offended by the concept of emancipation and taking their funds and their books and moving to the UK. So several records are not actually here; they're in records in the UK. So and also they took their wealth, So and would have left overseers most of their inherited, mulatto children to run their plantations, whilst they're there. So there, certainly that was not an accident. But the way that things happen, I guess, like you say, almost by accident, is the subversion. So we're given in like 7 years after the abolition of slave trade an opportunity to put a statue in the space where we would have experienced what we call the auction blocks, right?
Mm-hmm.
That person is a form of Lord Nelson, the statue of Lord Nelson. And then later in that same century, we decided to change the green, which we are being told was the space that people would meet in the town, possibly to see people who were coming in. That's now the place where we're planning to build or what becomes our Parliament building. So you're seeing a deliberate strategy to shift the space and shift its meaning.
Right.
However, what we are hearing too is that the people who are formerly enslaved, who are free colored, they're not paying attention to the statue as it passes. And actually, there are actually ordinances given that they must stop and salute a statue. Can you imagine? You're forced to salute a statue. But even from my memory growing up, we pass the statue, but we never look at it. One of the things that occurs to me now that the statue is removed is that I can actually look up, and I can see the sky, I can see the trees, I can get a sense of the ambiance. Because for a long time we had a cultural block. We decided that we were not going to see this thing that was a symbol of the thing that would have oppressed us.
Right.
And I think a lot of our movements have been subversive in that way. I've been fortunate to work with organizations who, whether it was deliberate or not, we sought to retell aspects of this history. And what was the most profound response was that part of the history which was, like you said, previously erased or not looked at. So if you were able to transform through a performance the hero square into that space in the pre-emancipation times, if you were able to transform another space to look like what it would have looked like when the indigenous people were here, then people get a chance to trouble that vista of what it is. What we find is that the biggest resistors are the people who are the keepers of that heritage. So parliamentarians, for the most part, they're living in this Westminster system, or Anglican priests, for instance, who would have been involved in this transshipment of people. When you think about Codgerton College, when you think about the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel, and there's places in Africa and also the churches and spaces here, you know that they were co-opted to be involved. You still see resonances of that in the use of imagery, of images of statues in their churches, and you ask yourself, how much longer is this going to go on? until we see a different a shift in the individual, a shift in those kind of imaging, in those kind of spaces. And I think what is nice is that the younger group of us that I am seeing are less afraid to speak out about these things. They want to see a representation of themselves in the space. And I think that was one of the catalysts that caused for the removal of the statue over and above the George Floyd movement and the Black Lives Matter movement. It was young people like Alex Downs and Shanna Trim who got their group of people together on social media to really help make that shift, tip that point. And I think that that's where we need to put our attention to. I'm not sure how we're going to treat to the people who have invested or who feel empowered to hold on to those narratives because they feel that letting them go is somehow going to give up parts of themselves. You know, there was a section of our society that thought that the removal of Nelson was the death of Barbados, you know. Barbados sad day with the removal of Nelson. And you can imagine in 2021 that you're still having people desperately searching for a symbol of whiteness when they are already dominant within a space.
Right.
It's very interesting.
But just to clarify, when you were talking about the statue, I know there may be people who don't understand about the story behind that statue, but the story you were talking about was the Nelson statue being removed in Barbados. And you mentioned that area where the statue was mounted used to be where the auction block was for the enslaved?
So where that space at the top of Broad Street, in front of the parallel building, was actually the space where boats would have been brought in, and enslaved people would have been seasoned and prepared in what we call barracoons for sale. And so there were particular spaces in that particular square. So if you can imagine that 200 years ago, right? This is where people would have been brought in, bought and sold.
Yes.
People would have been on the lines watching to see if they could see any of their family members coming in.
Yeah, so John, let me just interrupt you for 1 second there, because I don't want this to be that point that you're making there to be lost on our audience. The facts are that was, you know, all people who oppose the removal of these monsters and criminals from our public spaces, they often talk about erasing history. What they don't realize is that these monuments to colonial icons or colonial celebrities, as I like to call them, the celebrities of genocide, slavery, indentation, and apartheid, these guys are erasing history. So particularly in that case, where you have a very important historical point there for people of Barbados and for the entire Caribbean, because people were taken from there and sold to other Caribbean islands from that spot there in Barbados. So an important point of historical memory for us is erased. And a person who defended the slave trade, who would have died to keep people enslaved, is erected on that spot for us to celebrate and to worship. In fact, he was literally worshipped in Barbados, with people laying wreaths at his feet every year and children standing out in the sun and so on. Errol Barrow had to stop that, at some point and so on. So we have real work to do to begin to understand our past and to confront, the colonial violence that remains in our space. According to Frantz Fanon, imperialism leaves behind germs of rot, which we must clinically detect and remove, not just from our minds, but from our lands as well.
So we heard from Dr. Hunte about, that space in Barbados where the Nelson statue was. Shabaka, tell us about some of the things that your organization, some of the spaces that your organization is contesting at the moment.
Well, let me say first of all that the Caribbean is literally strewn about with unjust figures. It's littered with criminals, with the celebration of criminals. And, in the case of Trinidad, I mean, we could start with our coat of arms, which has the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria on it. The three ships that initiated the genocide of the Americas, initiated the destruction of a people and their civilization and the transatlantic slave trade. Those three ships that symbolize that are on our coat of arms. And it's just downhill from there. So right now I'm discussing with the Museum of Wales. They have a project they're running called Reframing Picton. And of course, you know, in Wales, they've already moved a statue of Picton. But here in Trinidad, we're not allowed to even have a discussion about honoring Picton on a street, right? We have a whole community in Woodbrook that is named after the British generals in the Boer War in South Africa, the men responsible for setting up the concentration camps that would cause so much suffering in the 20th century. Some people drive through that neighborhood and they see Kitchener Street and Buller Street, and they think it might be the Calypsonian and somebody they don't know.
Right.
Those are British generals who are, who were responsible for concentration camps in the 20th century, which they would, you know, set up in South Africa.
Yeah.
You know, the early predecessor to the apartheid state. You know, we have Woodford. You know, I heard you talking about the church. Woodford, for me, is the most notorious racist of Trinidad, the most notorious racist governor in Trinidad's history. He served for 15 years, the longest of any British governor, and he's the most memorialized British governor. And so he has, for example, a monument in the Catholic Cathedral downtown. Just if you go up to the altar, just to the left of it, above the door there, there's a marble, you know, block with an inscription on it. If you go to the, which praises him, and then if you go to the Anglican Cathedral, there's a life-size marble monument to him in a reclining position.
Reclining, you said.
A place in, he has the square next door to the cathedral. And let me just say, and Dr. Hunte is a spiritual Baptist leader, that square was named after Governor Woodford on the very same, in the very same year that they introduced the ordinances prohibiting the spiritual Baptists from practicing their religion in Trinidad, which I might add was an illegal act. And Dr. Fergus is doing research which shows that the spiritual Baptists are due reparations because that would have gone against British law for what they did. But what I want to draw is that connection between that violence of prohibiting and the violence of celebrating the most notorious racist in our country's history on that square. Those are two pieces of violence that are being enacted in a period of violence, of epistemic violence, which starts, in a sense, you could say symbolically with the erection of Christopher Columbus Monument on what is today Independence Square in about 1881, right? And let me just say some things about Woodford for you to understand when I say he was so vile and why he shouldn't be set. And let me just add to this too, that I have discovered, and I'm not confirming this yet, but I'm going to put this out here for the intrepid historians in the group. But I believe that Woodford and his wife are preserved like Egyptian kings underneath the Catholic Church on Park Street in the catacombs. And what makes that so disturbing is that that location, that Catholic church, which is Rosary Church and Rosary School, that is the location where the first Black Catholic priest in Trinidad, by the name of Francis de Ridder, Father Francis de Ridder, set up the first desegregated church pews and desegregated school in Trinidad and Tobago, against the wishes of Woodford and the hierarchy of the Catholic Church. In fact, Woodford and the church persecuted him to death. He died at 33 years old under pressure and persecution. And they would subsequently take his land, the land that he built, the first, again, another important historical marker, the first desegregated school in Trinidad, because Woodford had segregated churches, something which continued right up to the 1960s in Trinidad. He segregated schools and set up a system of hierarchy, which again would have impacted us in the post and up to today. We're still suffering from various forms of that legacy that Woodford was working on back in that period. And then they take Father de Ridder's land after they persecute him to death. They plant Rosary Boys and Rosary Church on it, and then bury Woodford on the man's land. Right? That tells you all you need to know about our society, about what we understand about justice, and why I say we are accomplices in the colonial violence that is being perpetrated against us.
Wow, I mean that's a lot to swallow. And in terms of this culture of this built culture of all these monuments, all these structures that have been created and put up to honor these different characters throughout the region, there's been a lot going on, especially in the Eastern Caribbean. So we know, like in Martinique, for example, Shabaka, you were mentioning to us that a lot has been happening there. Dr. Hunt, and from your perspective, when the statue was taken down in Barbados, the Nelson statue, what was the sentiment like amongst the people? So we understand what the leaders of the country, how they might particularly feel because of their connections to our colonial legacy, but the wider community, what was the sentiment like?
If I remembered, because it's all documented on YouTube, it's like a 4-hour clip of the entire event. And you know, you had your leaders set in wonderful seated and covered spaces for the event, and you had the people observing from the sidelines. So you know, it's a reconstruction of a elitist colonialist perspective. What was interesting though was that, you know, at a certain point, people realized that it was them that we had to pay attention to and not the people on the podium. So the visuals shifted. However, and there was also us watching parts of it from at home. I had a hard time trying to observe what seemed to me a very quote unquote dignified way of removing a statue. I would have much rather seen the back of it, and us it's being left. I was challenged by the statue coming down, this big statue coming down like Gulliver, and these little people performing in front of it. I was also challenged by the optics of what was it being carried away. It was almost poetic how it was being carefully laid and carried away. You know, I understand as an artist and an artifact how we want to preserve it. But the visual of our indigenous characters, our shaggy bears and our still walkers standing on the side as it goes off gave me the sense of, are we sorry that this thing is being left? And of course, since then we've had calls to have something to replace it, and of course we're looking to see how that can happen. But we haven't seen a lot of movement in that direction for a lot of reasons, including the current situation. But one wonders, you know, what will happen, because we're still maybe this is a colonial Patty Hearst syndrome. We're still mourning the loss of the statue, which by the way was put up by 4 families for £2,300, which might have been a lot of money at that time.
Wow.
Since then, the narrative has shifted. You know, I have a wonderful colleague of mine describe it as being decommissioned, as if we had a ceremony to put it up in the first place. So it's just those things that keep playing up, you know, and talking about the statue as if it's a person.
Yeah.
You know? It's all these things, this personification of this symbol, you know, really shows how, as my colleague would say, we can internalize a lot of these narratives on ourselves, and we can see then why it's so difficult for us to divest ourselves of those thinking, which is a necessary thing.
Of course.
Yeah, brother. I don't know if it makes you feel any better. I think that you have to look at Barbados in the context of the region, right? So last year we had the only country in the Caribbean where, and I mean, statues are falling all around the world, but the only country in the Caribbean where statues came down was in Martinique and Guadeloupe, the 2 colonies of France. Yeah. Right? They took down Schoelcher monuments, and they took down a monument to Josephine, the slave-owning wife of Napoleon, and Desnambuc, who was their version of Christopher Columbus, the first guy to come in and decimate the indigenous people and so on. And so for the rest of us in the Caribbean, I mean, here in Trinidad, we beautified our Columbus statue. We dressed him up very nice. We made him look pretty. We put the word murderer on him, and we exhorted the powers that be to remove him to the museum, and so on. But nowhere, everywhere, the powers that be in the Caribbean attempted to try to deflect the conversation, to push the conversation to the side. Their objective is to delay until we forget. So Barbados, Mia Motley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, and the powers that be in Barbados deserve enormous credit. They are part of a Caribbean tradition that goes back to 1954, when the great Guyanese poet Martin Carter and one of his mates went and bombed the Queen Victoria Monument in Guyana. And by the way, that monument was then taken and dumped by Fort Burnham in the bush. Recently, one of the recent governments went back and dug that monument out of the dirt, cleaned it up, refurbished it, and put it back on display in time for a royal visit. So it tells you that we are going in two different directions. And then, of course, the brothers and sisters in Guyana went down there last year or the year before and splashed some red paint on it to remind them in Guyana that we want that statue gone. But, you know, all across the region, going back decades, you have these struggles over monuments. And Barbados is the first place in the Caribbean where the powers that be, who traditionally have been, you know, neo-colonial in their framework, in their operations and so on, took that step to remove that injustice of that monument from its reverential place. So we have to, you all have to, we salute the people of Barbados, and we congratulate those responsible for removing, however negative, you know, however, you know, whatever issues we have with the removal. There's one question I want to raise with you though. The Moko Jambis, so to speak. On the continent of Africa, it is my understanding that you dance the Moko Jambi when you want to remove an evil spirit. So when I looked at that, that Nelson monument being moved, driven out in the back of that truck, and I saw those Moko Jambis dancing, I saw the symbolism of the removal of an evil spirit from Bridgetown. I don't know if that's what you got.
We saw that, but at the moment move, they all form like an honor guard, which was very.
I tried to follow him.
Yeah, it was very interesting. So I mean, like I said, it's a troubling thing, and like you said, I will give kudos to my country for having made the bold step to remove the statue. I wouldn't want to think it'd be another 100 and so many years before we give honor where honor is due and remember the space as a space of African, you know, of where Africans would have come in, and where even before that it was a space. Bridgetown was a space of the indigenous peoples. I mean, one of the histories that has been erased completely from our books is that of the peoples who were here before, maybe over 8,000 years it would seem. All across the West Coast, all across the South Coast, in caves and gullies are artifacts and memories of these people, but it's not anywhere in our histories.
Absolutely, and I'm glad you raised the question of the indigenous people, because you know, I want to get around to dealing with today the thing that is related to all these monuments, plazas, street names, symbols, etc., that celebrate the icons of the most vile periods of our history. Is the content of the curriculum, you know, in our education system. Those things stand on the narratives or the stories, the fairy tales that we tell our children. And the very first fairy tale we tell our children is the fairy tale of discovery. Yeah. And the idea, and part of that fairy tale, is that the native people just kind of disappeared. First of all, they were Arawaks and Caribs, and the Caribs were cannibals. Right. And the cannibals and the Europeans, in a sense, saved the Arawaks from a worse death, because they would have ended up being eaten by the Caribs. You know, and that is the first piece of mythology. It's what I call the most sacred ritual of colonialism, to bring our children into their epistemic framework. So by the time any Caribbean child is 7 years old, they have to learn this detritus. Yeah. And on top of that fairy tale stands these monuments in all our cities to Christopher Columbus.
So you can imagine then, if these people growing up in these systems come upon, while they're doing construction or if they're doing any kind of work, these bones or these artifacts, they're not sensitized to think of these things as things of value. Huh? Right.
No.
So in many cases, we would have many cases you have seen people building hotels or building buildings, coming across these sites, and just thinking, okay, let's see how's the quick way we can take what's needed and then build on top of it. My father says that Barbados is a literal tomb if you think about the lives of the enslaved, because there are bodies everywhere.
Yeah.
But we did not give them the respect that was due to them at their moment of transition. So
Wow.
when you're talking about trauma and you're talking about what is we're experiencing on a psychic level or we're experiencing in terms of our economy, you may want to think, if you take on another lens of thinking, that this is not just a happenstance. This is as a result of neglect. This is as a result of not being able to, or not being willing to, or not being open to acknowledging what existed on the space before. And it's unfortunate because we should feel that intrinsic connection, but we've also been disconnected from even that part of ourselves, you know, that we have been trained to think that we cannot connect, we cannot look and see with other eyes, and we cannot experience. So, I mean, the whole thing to me needs a complete reset. Not necessarily to blame anybody, because they did what they did, and for that we are here. But we also have to put it into balance and really now privilege what we feel and what we know about ourselves to be true.
Yeah. Gentlemen, I want to take a quick break to show our audience a report that was actually sent to us by One Caribbean Figures, which is this group that tries to promote awareness of some of these same stories that you're talking about, of the toppling of the statue in French Guiana to Schoelcher. Because some people may not be aware that these things are happening in our region. So I just wanted to show a short clip of news coverage on the removal of that statue.
I just wanted to. We'll have to go after all the statues, which, I mean, first of all, that says a lot about our culture, that it's strewn about with unjust figures. I mean, what does that say about the country we...
It is time to teach the truth and remove the lies and oppression. It is time to remove the commemorations of hate, bigotry, and colonization.
Columbus must fall. You said take him down. Columbus must fall. Take him down. Columbus must fall. Take him down.
We take no break in genocide. We take no break in genocide.
O'Malley said it already. Emancipate yourself from mental.
Why should you have to bow to these things?
I think there was a little tech issue there. Sorry about that. So let me go back to
Sean, you got to take the time to introduce that piece there.
Yes, we're going to come back to that. We're going to come back to that. So that's why I said let's just watch the report, and then I'll give you the opportunity to introduce that properly.
Victor Schoelcher et l'esclave libéré déboulonné, leur statut à terre. Des images faites par un passant vers 2 heures cette nuit. Ce matin, les statues ont disparu, enlevées par les autorités et placées en lieu sûr, selon la mairie de Cayenne. Seul reste le piédestal, maculé de rouge avec les statues il y a 15 jours déjà. La disparition interpelle les passants, comme ce père et sa fille.
Je me pose la question pourquoi la statue est partie, je sais pas où c'est, et je vais la revoir.
Vous n'êtes pas d'accord?
Non, je veux que l'on remet à sa place pour montrer les nouvelles générations, surtout les petits jeunes qui arrivent pour bientôt pour connaître c'est quoi ça.
Victor Schoelcher a œuvré pour l'abolition de l'esclavage, mais de Fort-de-France à Cayenne, des militants fustigent l'histoire officielle qui a occulté les suites coloniales de.
All right. So I just wanted to show some of our viewers, you know, what transpired in Cayenne, French Guiana, with the removal of that statue. Shabaka, you have been in contact with our cousins, our brothers and sisters in the French Caribbean. Tell us about some of the things that you have witnessed and discussed with them regarding the removal of monuments and statues, their perspectives.
Right. So I think that Schoelcher is one of the most interesting figures in this thing. He doesn't deserve a place among the Christopher Columbuses, the Desnam books, and other characters like that. So his story is a bit unfortunate in a sense. Why does he get taken down is the question we have to ask. And when you ask that question, what you will discover is that the people of Martinique and Guadeloupe, Martinique in particular, they actually freed themselves. Now, this is what I would point out to you. There is nowhere else in the Caribbean where an abolitionist is celebrated publicly, right? The only other statue to somebody who opposed colonialism is one that went up recently in the Dom Rep and to Father Antonio Montesino, and that was very controversial. For a long time, they didn't want to touch Montesino.
Right.
But the only abolitionist who celebrated anywhere in the Caribbean is this particular abolitionist, Victor Schoelcher. And you ask yourself, why is he celebrated in Martinique? He's celebrated there because the people actually freed themselves. So he was working towards an emancipation declaration in France.
Right.
And during that period, the people in Martinique got up under the leadership of an enslaved person called Romain, and they forced the local authorities in Martinique to give them their freedom. So they freed themselves. And then sometime later, his emancipation decree arrives.
Right.
And what the French authorities then did was they created a very small monument in some corner down a back road in the bush to Romain out of wood.
Right.
And they created a Schoelcher street, a Schoelcher square, Schoelcher monuments, a Schoelcher library, school, all kind of Schoelcher, this and that and the other.
Right.
What they were attempting to do was not to celebrate emancipation with Schoelcher, but to erase the emancipation of the people of the work, the efforts of the people of Martinique and Guadeloupe, to make them eternally grateful to France for their freedom.
Of course.
And so when the people went after Schoelcher, they weren't going after the individual Schoelcher. They were going after the way that Schoelcher was used as a form of epistemic colonial violence in their space. So I think that's really important.
Yes.
But beyond that, I also want to say that the brothers and sisters in Martinique, they beautified a monument to Christopher Columbus, a sister by the name of Afua, Sister Afua, oh gosh, her name just slipped my mind there.
Explain to us what you mean by beautified, though, because people might think that.
Well, beautified is a term that comes from our brothers and sisters in New Orleans. When they go out and they, what the authorities would call vandalize a monument, they consider it to be beautification. So we imported the term, right? So they would have, this sister, Afua, would have Fanewa Afua. She went out and beautified a monument to Christopher Columbus in the town of Carbe. That's where it all began. That was in 2017.
Okay.
And she was then charged for assaulting a police officer and for destruction of public property. Now, the town of Carbe had a public meeting and they decided that it was wrong for them to, and historically inaccurate, because they had also claimed that Columbus had landed there or something like that, for them to celebrate Columbus. But they still proceeded to charge Fanewa and to take her to court. And I went to Fort-de-France to be there with her when she was being arraigned, and she was told that she would be fined. And we interviewed her just as she came out of the court. And she explained, so we told her, well, when we found out that she was going to be fined, we said, well, we will try to raise some money in the Caribbean community to pay your fine. You know, we don't want you to go to jail.
Yeah.
She absolutely objected and refused to that, saying that we in the Caribbean had paid enough for the crimes of Christopher Columbus. And she had told her children already that she was prepared to go to jail. She had prepared them for the eventuality that she would go to jail if she had to. So tremendous courage out of the brothers and sisters in Martinique, in particular the sisters. Because again, when you look at that monument of the fallen monument to Schoelcher there, and of course that would have included Josephine and it was two sisters from Martinique who took responsibility on TV for that. And let me just put this in perspective. The Prime Minister of France goes on TV one day and he says, no monuments will be removed anywhere across French territories, because he's seeing it happening in Belgium, in England, in the United States of America. And 2 days later, they lick up two Schoelcher statues, and 2 days after that, they lick up Josephine and they lick up the Istanbul. And two young women face the power of the entire state of France with their history of imperialism, of the most virulent and violent imperialism, and decide to take responsibility for that. Right now, I mean, I look at it from our own perspective here in Trinidad. I mean, I know some brothers went down and tried to remove Columbus statue, they fail, you know? Right? Right? Some people say, well, I didn't have the courage, we didn't lick it up, we didn't mash up the one in Barbados of Nelson, right? We didn't want to face the wrath of the police service and so on. But these three women, starting with Afward, and next one was Jessie, and another sister, Alexine, they all took responsibility for beautifying and destroying monuments in Martinique. So incredible story out of Martinique.
Yeah, lots happening in the French Caribbean. Dr. Hunt, let me ask you, as we're kind of coming full circle, the title of this conversation is The Path to Progress, Reconciliation, and Closure. From your perspective, if we are going to confront these issues of built cultures that, you know, do not represent a true picture of our history, what do you think is that path to reconciliation and closure?
I mean, that's so difficult. I mean, when you look at the landscape and you look at Barbados, for instance, how we have just become an installation of plantations, right? From what we were before. There's so much in the built culture that reflects a colonial narrative. You know, I'm always intrigued by how we can give a very succinct description of our built culture from the Europeans' perspective. Yeah. We are able to speak to other realities. Maybe they don't exist, or maybe, like you said, we're not programmed to see how trees are laid, how plants grow in a particular space. To really know, you know, so you know, as a performing artist, I look to the intangible heritage. I look to see how people use the space to get a sense of that reality. I look to nature. I look to you know, those particular things, because we did live in a time where we had to adapt. We had to be subversive. We had to shift our meanings. Yeah. So a lot of our history has been about. A lot of our stories have been around that. So if we were at that point, if we are at that point where we're beginning to face those things head on, we're going to have to challenge the institutions like the church and the school systems to really look at not only how they use learning in the institutions, but the institutions themselves, how they function, what they look like, how they operate, how do they represent themselves. I was asked to speak to a group of bishops from the South that called Cogiton College, and I was in the introduction by the principal. He said that, you know, this is a space that was built by Christopher Columbus, you know, so there's a statue, there's a bust of him there, and he wanted us to give a moment of silence. So in my introductory remarks, I said, well, I understand that we are paying attention to Christopher Columbus, but I would like to pay attention to all the ancestors who would have helped him build this space, who probably died, who probably think, I don't know their names because the names are erased from history, but their presence is here. Yeah. We also think about how, you know, systems like the Anglican Church were co-opted in the post-emancipation period to Christianize enslaved people, to discourage them from what they consider to be their quote-unquote practices. Giving them incentives to work, giving them incentives to get time off from work, you know, give them money if they got married, you know, instead of, you know, what they consider to be maybe polyamorous or polygamous relationships, not understanding how the functional aspect of these things. There's a lot of things that we have been conditioned to grab onto, and that has disconnected us from our sense of ourselves as African people. Right. And I think the most damaging thing has been, are we African? Are we willing to talk about ourselves as African, you know? We look at people who look a certain way, we call them Chinese. We look at the way we call them Indian. We look at certain people, some way we call them Asian, but we don't look at ourselves and call ourselves African. Why is that? That's because of what we've experienced. So The culture is a reinforcement of the traumas that we have experienced through our education system.
Mm-hmm.
We need to redress the education system, not necessarily to tear down the walls, but to have it function in a different kind of way, to bring the full history of how it came to be here. You know, no one person, no one white man built a building. No church built a building. You know, this is the work and the co-opting of people in a forced labor situation to develop these things, build these things. I think the first thing we have to do is to admit what really happened.
Right.
That's the unbearable thing, the truth that people are unwilling to face, because then they will have to face the feelings that come up for them.
Of course. And I think that connects to what Shabaka said in the beginning about understanding the past, having the courage to face it now and the will to move forward. Shabaka, how would you want us to leave the audience thinking about their role? I know you said earlier, Clark, we're all accomplices. We're all, we all have a stake in this thing. The average person in the Caribbean and in the African diaspora at large, what would you leave them with, understanding the role that they can play in dismantling or reformatting, reshaping all of this that we exist within?
Yeah, so the first thing I want to do is to add to the point that my brother Hunte is making there. He talks about how the celebration of these icons and so on in our public spaces, how they disconnect us from the past. They play a role definitely in disconnecting us, but more so they devalue our very existence.
Yeah.
Right? When you celebrate a criminal who committed the most horrendous crimes against humanity, against your ancestors, in the very location where those crimes were committed, your value as a person is less. This is what made Black Lives Matter such a powerful slogan. It really got to the center of the way the system was organized in such a way that your life, Sean, and my life, and Dr. Hunt's life had a different value. An indigenous person's life in the Americas or in Africa or in Asia had a different value to a white person's life. Or there was, or the fact that when I say white person there, I think it's important for us in the Caribbean to also begin to interrogate the way that white privilege extends beyond Europeanness. And a lot of us live in white privilege and operate in white privilege, and we've occupied the position of the settler colonialists now, and we are the ones actively involved in the oppression of the poor and the masses who have begun to occupy the native position and the real true Black position in our society. I mean, all that is important. But at the end of the day, the bottom line is that this is a question of values. And if you agree, right, that a Native American person and an African person and a Chinese person, an Indian person, and a Syrian person are equal to that in value, one life is equal to the life of one life of any European, then anybody who committed crimes against those Black peoples of the world, when they start to kill in the hundreds of millions. So maybe if you kill one person, that's enough. But maybe we need to work by a different standard for some of the other people on the planet. When you start to kill in the hundreds of millions, then you cannot be honored. You cannot have a reverential monument in our public spaces. It devalues us. It erases the efforts, the struggles, the sacrifices of our ancestors. And of course, I also need to spend 1 second on that point, because all these spaces occupied by these criminals and our young people never have a chance to confront, to walk into, to bounce into, to feel, to meet any of the people who are responsible for the freedoms they enjoy today. It's no wonder we have this rose-colored picture of colonialism. When the Gleaner did a survey in 2011, Jamaicans overwhelmingly wanted to go back to colonial thing. There was also some surveys done in Barbados. I don't remember the years, where people voted for to return to colonialism. There are a lot of people in the Caribbean who feel we'd be better off under colonialism. Some will say it publicly, some will keep it privately, right? The only reason that people could think like that is because of all the things we discussed today. From the hiding of the crimes by the British authorities, that's the actual documentation of the crimes, from the hiding of the crimes by the colonials here in the Caribbean, removing any idea of a plantation, removing the whips, the shackles, everything from our view, removing all the information about it from our history text for our children, and then planting these icons of genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid all over our public spaces. So this is a comprehensive thing that has devalued us. And if we want to go into a society that is less racist, that is less punitive and more embracing of each other, where, you know, the criminal justice system treats everybody equally, where there's more economic equality, where there's less structural racism, where children where every year I don't have to see African children coming home and telling their reports of African children being discriminated against for their hair in primary and secondary schools all across the Caribbean. Imagine that. You know, in the 21st century, you have African girls and boys, mind you. I have so many reports of boys being discriminated against in schools here in Trinidad because they go to school with their natural hair. In the case of boys, all they have to do is get about a centimeter of hair on their head before the teacher starts to tell them that that looks untidy. And these boys are sitting down next to a child with hair that is closer to European hair, and that hair is down to their collar because it's straight, and they can't grow a half a centimeter of their African hair because it's untidy. Something is wrong with it. Yeah. That's what we're talking about, the value system that governs the way that we live and interact with each other. If we are serious about changing that value system, if we are serious about reparations, we have to start to do the repair work right here in our spaces. And this is why our population, for example, is not so keen on reparations. They have no idea what they're asking for compensation for. Right. Yeah. According to the head of Milner Hall, when we went to Milner Hall at University of West Indies, and we addressed the question of the name of Alfred Milner, which was on the oldest hall of residence for about 90 years. The chair of Milner Hall said to us, and we have him on tape, that we should be grateful for slavery and colonialism, because without those things, where would we be? Right? And when we publicized that, the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine campus, sent us a legal note saying cease and desist, or we could face prosecution for defaming their students, but we had him on tape. You know? And this is where we are at right now in the Caribbean. Yeah. And you can't blame the man. That's all the man knows about colonialism is democracy and the rule of law. He doesn't understand that we had to fight to humanize those things. Those things were just names. They were empty. And we gave them substance and form. And where we have failed is the failure to really to finish that project of giving them substance and form. Right.
I mean, we're hearing, you know, these connections happening throughout all these conversations. This morning we had a brilliant conversation with Dr. Sylvia Ndiou, who's a social historian, and she talked about some of the same things that you mentioned, Shabaka, is that, you know, in order for us to really understand and to face and confront what happened during the colonial project, we have to look at the stories, the untold stories, the people who were made voiceless, and really try to elevate that in our consciousness. Without that, then you're right. If you don't know what happened and the horrific nature of it, the extreme levels of violence that happened for hundreds of years on the land that we walk on today, then when people talk about reparations, you'll be like, well, I don't know, I don't understand what we have to get reparations for. Yeah. I know one of the things you wanted to share with us, Shabaka, is something that your organization is working on, a project, a audio-visual project. You want to tell us a little bit about that before we wrap up?
Yes, well, I just want to say that we started in 2016 with the Columbus Must Fall project, which really centered on Trinidad and Tobago. We have 2 monuments. We used to have 3, but now we have 2 monuments to Christopher Columbus, one put up in 1881, the other in somewhere around 2000 by a private individual on public land, which is so insane, because I know I can't put up a statue of anybody anywhere. If I said I wanted to put up a statue of Kwame Ture on Oxford Street where he was born, I know I would have a long battle with the powers that be. This man just got up one day, decided he wanted to put up a monument to Christopher Columbus and erected it on the beach, and nobody complained. But what we want to do now even though we haven't been able to yet remove our own monuments, is to take this struggle to the entire Caribbean. This whole region is the locus of Christopher Columbus's crimes, and we recognize that all across the Americas, from Argentina to Canada, Columbus monuments have fallen in the last, just over the last year. In fact, since around 2000, they started coming down. And the place where he actually committed his crimes, because he didn't commit his crimes in Argentina, he didn't commit his crimes in North America, in Columbus, Ohio. He committed his crimes here in the Caribbean. He came to Trinidad in 1498, and then he sent men back here to start picking up people on the coast of Trinidad to enslave them in Hispaniola and to enslave some of them to die for pearls down off the coast of South America. That is what he did while he was in charge of the colonial project in the Caribbean. And yet here in the Caribbean, we continue to honor him. So we're launching No Pride in Genocide, hashtag No Pride in Genocide. And what I'm going to share with you today is a quick preview of what that project is going to look like when we start.
So you'll tell us when to stop it, yeah?
You could go right to the end, because I gave you only a snippet there.
Excellent. All right, great. Let's take a look.
I just wanted to ask a question about this argument we've heard a lot about, oh, if you go after one statue, then we'll have to go after all the statues, which, I mean, first of all, that says a lot about our culture, that it's strewn about with unjust figures. I mean, what does that say about the country we...
It is time to teach the truth and remove the lies and oppression. It is time to remove the commemorations of hate, bigotry, and colonization.
Columbus must fall, you said take him down. Columbus must fall. Take him down. Columbus must fall. Take him down.
We take no pride in genocide. We take no pride in genocide.
Up man is headed already. Sure. Emancipate yourself from mental.
Why should you have to bow to these things?
Remove the monuments and statues. Reclaim the space, reclaim the name and the glory. Colonialism, we take no pride in the genocide, slavery, indentureship, or apartheid. Well, if we take no pride in your genocide, reparations, no justice, preeminence, it's high time. Confront the evil wrongs that have been done, so we can never, ever, ever forget.
We say to Christopher Columbus today, the time is up.
Oh yes, we never, ever, ever forget. Cause if we forget and history repeats itself, then the shame is not condemned, it's on us. Well, if we forget and history repeats itself, then the shame is not condemned, it's on us. So I want to see you fire, blaze up them vampires. I want to see you fire.
No, we want to do this peacefully.
I'm a let me burn down them oppressors. Yeah.
Take down Nelson. Take down Nelson.
Take down Nelson. Take down Nelson.
The mission of our generation is the mental emancipation of our people.
All right. The mission of our generation is the mental emancipation of our people. Final words, gentlemen. Dr. Hunt.
Well, I mean, we take down the statues and the monuments and we replace them with monuments of freedom. I'm fully on board. Part of that has to be taking on the statues that we have in ourselves. So that means that we have to look at our own personal histories. We have to check in with our families. We have to find out what our lineages are. We have to unravel all that intrigue, all that salt. You know, we carry the blood of the colonizers and of the oppressors with ourselves. Resolve that within ourselves, and to give space for those other energies to come forth and to take the space. I think that one of those things that comes forward in those stories is that, you know, the narrative is colonialist, but it's also very male-centered. There are lots of women who have played an important role in our preservation, in the decision they would have made to preserve us for this time that we can reclaim. So I think that we need to pay honor to that as well, and just to live in that, to be open to what those lessons are telling us and to what those ancestors are telling us. I believe once we acknowledge and accept that they were here, they come through to remind us. We see it in ourselves, we see it in our families, we see it in the faces of people around us, and we are able then to connect with that, align with that, and to move to that. We really need to do more to honor and respect those who have passed. That is a major tragedy, and that could be one of the challenges that we face. We look at all these reasons and we can ask ourselves why, but there's a how. There's a how to reclaim, how to resolve, how to reconcile. And I think it's through the facing and acknowledging of what has happened and what has happened to our people.
Yes, definitely. And Shabaka, final word?
Yeah, well, let me just salute the wisdom of my brother John Hunte, and let me use this opportunity to tell him how much I appreciate sharing this space with him. Let me also take the opportunity to acknowledge the development that has taken place around one of our heroes in Guyana, Brother Walter Rodney. The government has finally recognized his death as an assassination and not as him blowing up himself before committing some kind of terrorist act. And his family is now due compensation. We're going to be following up on that. But that is part of the process of recovering, not just removing the monuments to the icons of genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid, but also recovering or rescuing our own heroes, real heroes, from the dustbin of history. And in fact, the Guyanese scholar Jan Carew said that false heroes burden not just our history, but our character as well. And so we want to really put the emphasis on real heroes. And to close, I'll just close with this. All the work that we do in the CRFP, in the Freedom Project, and I think this whole project for removal is about bringing people's memory to life, knowing that when your memory is truly alive, you don't just want to contemplate history, but to make it. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, I want to say thank you for first accepting the invitation to be part of this conversation, and also for taking your time out to spend it with us this afternoon and to illuminate us in more ways than one. So Ival, I hand over to you. You're on mute.
Wow. That was powerful. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for sharing your knowledge and truly interrogating our understanding and view of self and the oppressive impacts on our self-worth due to colonialism. We truly must honor self, our people, and our real heroes. You showed us that the most sacred space is the intersection of our mind, our heart, and our gut, which is where our humanity lies. Thank you so much, Sean, for facilitating this conversation and reflections on reparation. Thank you to our viewing audience for joining the Black Consciousness Festival's weekend of conversations on reparations. Stay tuned to our exciting schedule and get more information on the beautiful people around the world that are collaborating to make this weekend happen, and register for upcoming conversations at our website, theblackconsciousnessfestival.com. Our conversations continue all weekend and our schedule is online. Our next conversation is actually tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Atlantic Standard Time, entitled Ground Zero, Those We Encountered Here. Do join us. Thank you again, Sean, Mr. Shabaka, Dr. Hunt. Thank you to the entire team that has pulled our mini festival together. Have a good night, evening, afternoon, morning, and walk in pride, power, and practice.